Hello, Health and Wellness Mid-Bronx seniors. We're so happy to be back with you. We miss you, and we know that you are using all of the knowledge that we gave you before, that we've been sharing with each other in our nutrition education classes. But we thought it was pertinent that we come back and talk to you during COVID about how you are utilizing the information that you have and how you have to stay healthy today. So today we're going to focus on whole grains. My little talk today is called Whole Grains 101. The reason I'm focusing on whole grains is because I know that you're not coming to the center as much as you used to in your home. And I have seen the meals that many of us are receiving at home on the varying programs. And yes, they are whole grain heavy. And my concern is that you might be getting tired and maybe not understanding that you do need to take in these whole grains that you are receiving on your platter. So let's go over the importance of whole grain. Why is it important that you understand the difference between whole grain and refined grains? Whole grains. Let's see. How does whole grain impact your health? People who eat whole grains reduce serious health risk. Risk of heart disease drops 25 to 36%. Risk of type 2 diabetes drops 21 to 27%. Risk of digestive cancers drop 21 to 43%. And risk of stroke drops 37%. But wait, there's more. It controls weight. In women and men who ate more whole grains consistently gained less weight over an 8 to 12 year period in a Harvard study. Don't worry about the Harvard, but it is a true study, and that's what they saw. So if you're consuming more whole grains, you will lose weight. You live longer lives, and in that same study, every 1 ounce serving of whole grains was associated with 5% lower total risk of death and 9% lower risk of death from heart disease. That's amazing. You can do something about how you decide whether or not you are at risk for heart disease. That's an amazing thing. The power is in your hands. And it drops your blood pressure. Eating a whole grain oat cereal, such as oatmeal every day, if you eat oatmeal every day without the milk, or without the condensed milk, or the sugar, for 3 months, you have 73% of those with high blood pressure reduce or eliminate their need for medication. If you eat oatmeal every day, you will use less of your medication for blood pressure. That's amazing news. All right, there's something here about kids who eat whole grains, but we're not going to talk about kids because we're focused on us today. You will feel fuller and more satisfied if you eat whole grains, right? That's another thing. And of course, we're not young people, so we're not concerned about acne, but if you are concerned, that it can do that too. It will lower your propensity for acne. I don't think that you're in that range, but it's good to know if you have grandkids that if they eat along with you, that is what's going to happen with them. They will see less of their acne problems, okay? So, reasons for whole grain health benefits. Nutrients. Whole grains have 3 to 5 times the vitamins and minerals found in refined grains. Antioxidants. Corn has almost twice the antioxidant activity of apples, while wheat and oats almost equal broccoli and spinach in antioxidant activity. And fiber. Whole grain products offer 1 gram to 4 grams of fibers per serving. Fiber varies from 3.5% in brown rice to around 17% in barley. Eat your barley. Not the refined barley, but the real barley. Awesome. 17% of fiber in barley. Did you know that? Sometimes that escapes me because I pass barley on the aisle and I never pick it up unless I want to have some minestrone soup or whatever that soup is that we make from it. But it's a great grain to have. It has 17% fiber. Awesome. That's amazing. So the dietary guidelines for Americans recommend that we consume 3 or more ounce equivalents of whole grain products per day, with the rest of the recommended grains coming from enriched or whole grain products. In general, at least half the grains should come from whole grains. Okay, so at least half your grains should come from whole grains. So now the problem is we don't necessarily know what is a whole grain. And that's why we're having the talk today. So many of us know that whole grains are good for us, but it's really hard to distinguish what a whole grain is. So let's try to see if we can get at that right now. What are whole grains? Whole grains are foods made from them, contain all 3 essential parts and all the naturally occurring nutrients of the entire grain seed. So the entire seed of any grain is the whole grain. And what does the entire seed mean? If the grain has been processed, example, cracked, crushed, rolled, extruded, lightly pearled, and or cooked, the food product should deliver approximately the same rich balance of nutrients that are found in the original grain seed. So sometimes you see those cracked seeds. For it to be labeled or known as a whole grain, it must have the same makeup that it had when it was whole. And what is the makeup? The bran, the endosperm, and the germ. I know that's a lot for you to think about, but it's very important that you understand that the whole grain, what it means to be whole. To be whole, you must have the endosperm, the bran, and the germ. And that's what makes it a whole grain. So what is a whole grain? That is the mystery that brings us to the table today, because a lot of us are still confused about what the grain is when it's whole. And it is very important, because if we don't get that understanding right, then we really could be hurting ourselves with the types of grains that we are taking in, thinking that we're getting whole grains. Okay, so let me try to dispel the myth. Let me try to bring you back as much as possible to understanding what the whole in the whole grain means. The grain has parts to it, right? And when it's whole, it has the endosperm, the bran, and the germ. The endosperm is the inside, the bran is the outer piece, and it has the germ, which has a lot of nutrients in it, okay? So whole grains are foods made from them, contain all 3 essential parts and all the naturally occurring nutrients of the entire grain seed. If the grain has been processed, example, cracked, crushed, rolled, extruded, lightly pearled, and or cooked, the food product should deliver approximately the same rich balance of nutrients that are found in the original grain seed. Okay, so that is the definition of the whole grain. So now we can go to a list of what the whole grains are. All the following are whole grain when eaten with all their bran, germ, and endosperm: amaranth, barley. That's the same thing as barley, what we just talked about, right? That great eating thing that we're all going to go back to. We're all going to start eating barley again because it has 17% fiber. And it is a whole grain if it's not pearled barley. So I noticed that when people go to the store The barley that looks so cute and so nice and shiny, that's the one we get, but that's not the good barley. That's pearled barley. And if it's pearled, it does not have the entire nutrients that we need. It doesn't have the endosperm, it doesn't have the germ, and it has a little bit of bran. And so it's barley's cousin. It's not real barley, okay? So we're not gonna focus on pearl barley. Do not let them talk you into buying it. Buy the other barley, the ugly looking barley that still looks cute to me, but I know that's what you all say. And that's the barley we're going to cook, okay? Or we're going to eat. Not barley that is already pearled, okay? Buckwheat, that's corn, including buckwheat, millet, quinoa, rye, teff, wild rice, corn, oats, rice, sorghum, and rye, or a wheat hybrid of rye called triticale. You're not likely to see that one that much, but it is still a whole grain, so I have to mention it. All right, so we go them over: amaranth, buckwheat, millet, quinoa, rye, teff, wild rice, barley, corn, oats, rice, sorghum, also called millo, and triticale, which is a rye or a wheat hybrid. Okay? Wheat, including all the varieties of wheat, such as spelt and emmer and farro and einkorn and kamut and durum, and forms such as bulgur, cracked wheat, and wheat berries. The reason I mention all of this is because we're one big multicultural family in Mid-Bronx's congregate program. I know there are lots of different cultures, and many of you eat different types of these kind of grains, okay? So if you don't know the grain, don't think your neighbor who you've been sitting beside doesn't know it, right? Because we all eat differently. The people from South America are really into quinoa. And so that's one of these ones that we see a lot of. Spelt is very popular among African Americans, and farro among native African, continental Africans. Farro is big. So we have to mention all of the grains, and all these grains are awesome to eat, and we're gonna try when we get back with you to taste all these varieties. But for now, I want you to understand what a whole grain is. What is it, all right? And what's the difference it will make in your life, in your health, okay? So is it 100% or partially whole grain? Much as milk comes in different forms for different tastes, so does whole grain, or so do whole grains. Some people prefer to start with partially whole grain foods until they get used to the nuttier, fuller taste of whole grains, okay? So, like I said, we all have different ways of consuming, and if you're starting out with not eating one that you're used to, I know for a lot of people, quinoa was difficult in the last 2 years, but you've gotten so used to it now. It's nutty, it's beautiful. We put it with brown rice. We made it in sweet and savory dishes, and many of you are now eating quinoa like it's nothing, all right? So we know that with tasting, that you will have success with the nuttier and fuller taste of 100% whole grains, all right? What counts as a serving? What is a serving of whole grains? 100% whole grains. This amount of food counts as a whole grain serving. Half cup of pasta, half cup of rice or other grains, 1 slice of bread, 1 cup of cold cereal, half cup of hot cereal, and 1 small bagel or muffin. Partial whole grains, 16 grams of whole grains. Amount varies by the whole grain content. 16 grams or more of whole grain ingredients counts as a serving, okay? So it's very important that we know the difference between the whole grain serving and the partial whole grain serving. So partial whole grains, 16 grams of whole grain. Amount varies by whole grain content. 16 grams or more of whole grain ingredients counts as a serving. Okay? So as I was saying before, we need to be militant about our whole grain consumption, right? So we have the hardcore people. If you are into fat-free milk and 100% whole grain of anything, you're considered hardcore. Good luck. I love you. We need to do more of it. But if you make a choice to swap out your refined consumption of whole grains for partially healthier, right? So low-fat milk and honey whole grain bread. Let's say that's what you're doing. You're still better than if you just had 100% fat milk and white bread. Okay, so I want you to understand that these are intentional choices that you will make to live in a better and longer life, right? It is very important that we understand the difference, because if you continue to consume white bread or grains that are not 100% whole grain or considered whole grain, there is a consequence to that. It tastes good, but your health is not going to be as well as the other person who is doing better at introducing and making sure they're consuming partially healthy or hardcore whole grains or non-fat or fat items, okay? And we need to be clear about that. I wanted to come to you today to remind us that we have to make these choices. So how do we find whole grains? How are we going to make sure that we're getting whole grains? Finding whole grains, we read in the labels, and we can sometimes use the whole grain stamp. I'm not going to focus a lot on the whole grain stamp because there's some controversy sometimes around that, but you can always read the labels, okay? So these words mean whole grain. If it says whole and then the name of the grain, it is a whole grain. If on the label it says whole, the name of the grain, and then flour, it is a whole grain. If it says whole grain and then it names the grain, it is a whole grain. And if it's name of the grain and then a berry, so like wheat berry or what's the other one that's a berry? Oh my God, that we love in the Caribbean, I can't. But if it says the name of the grain and then says berry, it is a grain. And if it says the name of a grain and it says groats, for people who are from Europe, it is a grain, okay? These words also mean whole grain: brown rice, wild rice, oats, oatmeal, bulgur, cracked or crushed wheat, hulled or hull-less barley, graham flour, and whole white wheat. Whole white wheat doesn't mean that it's white bread or white. Once it says whole white wheat, white wheat is a type of wheat, but it's a whole grain, okay? So it's okay to have that. Here's what we don't know, right? Sometimes you have to read further. When it says flour, wheat flour, organic natural, unbleached, semolina, multigrain, stone ground, it doesn't mean it's whole grain. It could be, but it's not a sure thing. So we have to read further, right? And that's where the confusion is, because a lot of these words for a lot of people are coming out to mean that it's whole grain, and sometimes they are not. Maybe yes, maybe no. We need more information. When you see wheat flour, organic, natural, unbleached, semolina, multigrain, stone ground, it doesn't mean that it's whole grain. We need more information, okay? So now we definitely know that these are not whole grains. When you see enriched flour, bran, germ, wheat germ, degerminated, especially the cornmeal that we use to make the cornbread, right? Or porridge or whatever it is that we use it for. Pearled barley, we talked about that before. Grits, your grits and your hominy and your farina, they are not whole grains. They're delicious, but they're not whole grains, okay? Delicious to have. I know we love our hot cereal, we love our grits, we love our hominy, we love our farina, but they are not whole grains, so be careful, okay? So in your label reading practice, right, we need to understand what it is that we're reading, all right? And I am going to have to probably go to the supermarket with you, take a tour, but I have in my whole grain baskets, so this is my special whole grain pantry, that a box that I have in my pantry. It does not get contaminated with anything else. I do have non-whole grain items, but they're not in here. This is how I know the difference, right? So I already make the difference. If I reach in here, it is a whole grain. All right, so in my whole grain box at home, I have sorghum. Oh my God, this is awesome. This is so good. The sorghum, this is excellent. It's like popcorn. You can pop it like popcorn. But we're not going to spend a lot of time showing you what to use, because the next time I meet with you, we will be doing a demo cooking with these, okay? But I just wanted to show you how I differentiate my whole grains in my pantry box. Now, the reason the lentil is in here is because it is a whole grain, but I began to use it a lot in mixing with the spelt, and it's also a whole grain, but it's not the whole grain we're talking about right now, right? Okay, because it is a plant-based protein, something that's different, all right? The spelt, oh my God, spelt, awesome, okay? Spelt, I have whole wheat fettuccine. That's a whole wheat pasta. And it has flax and chia in it, but this is how I'm eating my pasta. Awesome, great. You can get this. It is not inexpensive, but it's not that expensive either, right? It's a good choice, and we need to be making better choices when we try to buy our grains, our whole grains, okay? And then I brought this because when I'm very hungry and I come home and I do not want to cook, these are awesome. I am not a person who tells you to do convenience food, but if you could do convenience healthy, this is amazing. And the sodium in it is not a problem. So I'm happy about this product. The brown rice from Uncle Ben's is another thing you can keep in your pantry. And when you can't make brown rice, it is an easy alternative, okay? But it's whole grain. And then what else do I have here? Let's see, I hope I haven't made a blunder, because anything that's in here, oh, so see, I spoke too early because I made a blunder. I have in here pearled barley. What did I say about pearl barley? we can't have pearl barley. So I've literally messed up my box, right? Because this is not a whole grain. All right, thankfully I can still read. And the pearl barley is in with my whole grain. Now it looks like it's whole grain. If I could show it to you, I would. Let's see. But it is not a whole grain because it's pearled. All right, that means, you know, some parts of it is gone. Some parts of it is missing. I don't know which parts stay. I have not looked at how they pearl barley. But once it says pearled, we trust it's pearled. We're not doing pearled barley as a whole grain. And then, of course, I have whole wheat flour. These are amazing for your pancakes, for your brownies, for your buns, for your pizza crust, for your bread. Amazing. This with my spelt every day and some blueberry, that is my bread. And that is my muffins, okay? And then I have medium grind cornmeal. It is a whole grain because it's medium ground cornmeal. Whole grain, stone ground. So when we see cornmeal, we have to take a look to make sure it doesn't say degerminated. If it says stone ground and it's not refined and shiny and all of that, we know it's still a whole grain, okay? And so that's my box. There are other things that I like as whole grain, but obviously I can't keep everything in my pantry. I'm not that, I don't have that much resources to be able to do that. But what we will do, so that you can get the ones you like and make your own pantry box, is we will take a trip to the store. And I'll attempt to look at and show you all the different types of whole grain that are on the supermarket shelf. Okay? Thank you so much for now. We will come back and we will talk more about your choices in the supermarket. And yes, so I am so grateful and I'm so excited that I still get to come to you and to talk with you about the things that I know that are concerning to you, that you're concerned that you might be having too much rice on the menu or too much pasta on the menu. But what we should be looking for is whether or not they are whole grain and whether or not it's the best of whole grain. If they're hardcore whole grain, right? If they're true whole grain, not partially whole grain, then you're better off. I wouldn't be concerned about it because you're getting as much fiber as you can and a lot of other nutrients from having the whole grain. I wanted to make sure that we're understanding that if you're eating brown rice and it is whole grain, it is okay. I know we're all concerned that it might be too much, but we can have a conversation with the suppliers or with ourselves. You need to be able to make different choices and have different choices on hand so that you can get better grains. Because there's, like I said, there's 3.5% in brown rice and there's 17% in barley. So if you're experimenting with grains and you made a bowl of rice, right? And then you made a bowl of barley and mixed, and then when you're ready, you mixed it together, you're ahead of the game. You're really doing yourselves well, but I don't want you to revert to not eating the whole grain and to go back thinking that the white rice is just as good as the grain or the couscous or any of those things that we're used to eating. We need to consume whole grains every day, and you'll be getting enough from your choices, okay? Thank you so much.